Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformational Value Podcast. Now today, I talk with Paul from Bitkiwi, who organise New Zealand's premier Bitcoin events. In this episode, we talk about how children and young people learn about and interact with money, and how these early experiences can shape their worldview and their understanding of value. The analogy of growing up as a digital native or in a bilingual family is useful here, as children naturally learn about sound money and Bitcoin thinking amongst the backdrop of the legacy fiat system, and they grow into adults ready to face a changing financial world. Now, this episode is from a couple of weeks ago, but I thought it was quite timely as we come up to Bitkiwi 4 in Christchurch next weekend on March 25th. It will be at the Beeley Quarter, and I'll be attending, and I hope to see you there. Now, I do hope you enjoy this episode. If you'd like to support the show, please consider streaming some Satoshis via your favourite podcasting 2.0 platform such as Fountain or Breeze. Otherwise, on to the show. And here we are, so we should be all good. You can hear me okay, sexy. Yep. Just pull that if you want.
The dulcet tones.
Oh yeah, but you got enough clearance there?
Yep,
Enough rope to choke yourself?
Yep.
So where are we at? We don't have to necessarily roll into it straight away, but what's been on your mind?
It's been on my mind.
With Bitcoin, we've got a few things happening.
Planning for Bitkiwi 3 and 4 in particular. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. I don't think people probably realise there's a lot of hours of planning and organisation that goes into it. So yeah, just putting the final things together at the moment, little adjustments to our Lightning Network system. Planning for, we've got no idea of numbers at the moment, so that's a bit of an unknown this time. I normally have a pretty good spin on who's coming, who's not. We're expecting slightly less with hopefully, well not hopefully, but I imagine a lot of the South Island people will wait for Bitkiwi 4. But there have been some random messages from people I don't know on Twitter, like looking forward to it, I'll be there. So I'm sort of optimistic there'll be a few new faces.
Yeah, well, I think you've definitely each Bitkiwi up until now has been an improvement on the previous one, and there's been more people, so it'd be nice to see that trend continue. And the Lightning side of it would be great to see as well, being able to use Lightning within the bar perhaps in some capacity. I mean, the second Bitkiwi that I went to, we kind of had that in a way with the tokens, and you could pay with Lightning and then get a beer with the tokens. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, we really want to expand that use, but we're sort of walking before we run a little bit. So we're going to roll out that same system at Bitkiwi 3, but we've got plans afoot for the next following Bitkiwis to start to improve and hopefully get some new things involved with the Lightning Network as well.
I think that's the way to go. And I mean, that's Bitcoin thinking, right? Is to be sustainable, to make sure it works, and to thoroughly test and to verify how everything fits together.
And I've mentioned that before. We're quite focused on sort of doing everything we do with Bitcoin principles in mind. So it comes up constantly, and at first it was kind of a novelty and a sort of a fun thing, but as time's gone on, we've got really serious about it because we realise that it may be fun and we laugh when we say these things, but it works.
Yeah.
And that putting in that proof of work and just doing those things is really beneficial. And we've talked a bit about this before, but applying those principles in life, you can't go wrong, really.
Yeah.
And so every post has been a winner so far to get these events going. So we'll just keep that frame of mind. Yeah.
No, that's really great to hear. And I think these last few weeks have been quite informative for me to really dive into the space of Bitcoin adoption, I think, and kind of what it looks like in New Zealand. I mean, sort of being involved with yourself and a few other people, just kind of ideating on it and kind of smashing preconceptions around what adoption even looks like. I think that's been quite interesting, like I've got my mum using Bitcoin to start with, but her her partner's business, we were starting to chat and saying, hey, what's the possibility of actually running Bitcoin on it, and they were totally open to it. And it's not the kind of business that that would come to mind for Bitcoin, and it's not the kind of thing that you would even use, you wouldn't search it out on a map. It's a local business that provides a certain kind of service, but in terms of like carpentry and wood turning and that sort of thing, so it's kind of fixed in that sense. You can't necessarily move it around. But looking at, saying, look, we accept Bitcoin, it just sort of is another move towards that acceptance of it as a parallel system. And I think we will see these sort of two systems running alongside each other for some time. But the more people that come into the new system, the more optionality there is. And it's just through these conversations and just kind of the discourse. I find that really important.
I've had the same realization, actually. It's funny you say that, because like the chat we had last week, the Zoom call on Saturday, that opened my eyes to a few things. When we were talking about the hyperlocal economy, and then I mentioned about Dan from Bitkiwi's comments about tradesmen, and there's been a few things that have popped up like that have made me realise that the adoption it's not necessarily going to happen in the way that I maybe once envisioned it. Like when we first started talking together, and we had a real idea of this rush of creating a point of sale and then getting out there ourselves, almost like unpaid salesmen trying to convince businesses to adopt it. And I used to think that was how it's going to happen in New Zealand. Now I don't think so at all. Like there's many ways that will come in, and that may not necessarily be one of the main ways.
I think there's going to be a network effect, and having started to dive into this conceptually, I think our fundamental knowledge, not just of Bitcoin, but how adoption of a revolutionary technology takes place, I think that's actually a case study that is pretty hard to find examples of. The internet's one of the only ones we've got, and even then that kind of happened, I think, in a different capacity. Like it was quite a slow burn, and there was I think there was an opportunity for people to not look at it straight away. Like I think money fundamentally touches everyone's life, and so you kind of need to look at it and engage with it. Whereas I think the internet, the reason it took so long, because it was around for a long time before it really became mainstream, was because you could get away with not using it. But I think the difference with Bitcoin is that it is the superior form of value, and it is zero sum. Like there's only going to be one winner here, and there'll be a phase where there's both systems running, the legacy system and the Bitcoin system. But eventually, you're going to see these trends and this kind of slow decline and maybe fast decline of the fiat system.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm not sure really what that's going to look like. You could see a huge speed up if something like, particularly in New Zealand, where everybody stores their value in their real estate. If something starts to happen to that real estate and they urgently need to find another store of value, where are they going to turn? Yeah,
well, that's what I think is sort of the thing I'm getting at, is we're quite naive to pluralistic currencies here. Like it's not something people consider, right? Whereas in a lot of countries it's natural to start thinking in that kind of dynamic way where you're kind of running the calculation in your head. And I think just based on that same conversation we had on Saturday, the fact that there's these kind of cafes and different businesses emerging who are not saying, look, I want Bitcoin so I can just turn it into fiat. I think that was our preconception. We said, well, businesses are never going to want to accept the risk of holding a volatile asset like Bitcoin. But actually, I don't know any businesses who want to change it straight back into fiat. Like all of the people that I've spoken to, and it's not a huge number, but they all want to hold the underlying Bitcoin because they know that it's worth more. And still running the calculation of, well, what's it worth in New Zealand dollars is, I think, it's an easy argument if you're kind of looking at it from the outside to say, well, of course they're not going to want to hold this thing. But those people the people who are criticizing that they're not on a Bitcoin standard. They're not thinking in Bitcoin terms. They haven't fully conceptualized the kind of the monetary revolution here, which is that holding any amount of Bitcoin at whatever price it is today is going to be incredibly more worthwhile than selling it out to fiat in the long term. And that realization that there's this kind of node-based approach where you've got, say, this Cambodian restaurant in Christchurch that we were talking about on Saturday, which is like come out and said, look, we want to accept Bitcoin. We want to learn about it. And then the businesses around them in that shopping centre maybe start thinking, well, hey, can I learn about that? What's that mean for me? And you have this kind of very organic node kind of expanding, say, in that particular geographic location, which is hyper-local, right? But then the hyper-global is that Cambodian family, they say, hey, need to send some money back home to my family in Cambodia. They can then send that instantly and without any middlemen. So that's the hyper-global. And I think hyper-global, hyper-local, running those two scenarios simultaneously is maybe very difficult. It takes a lot of kind of mental compute to think about, but I think they will happen simultaneously. And so there'll be these massive developments where you've got international trade happening in Bitcoin, but then just on a local level, you've got these people saying, hey, yeah, I do also accept Bitcoin. And that's where the game theory plays out, that the hardest money wins. That's what people want.
I mean, just the fact that is a potential scenario shows the beauty of Bitcoin. I mean, what other thing could you look at it in that way? And it's got a track record of history for exactly that kind of adoption when you look at it, because it's, no one ever, well, only on an individual level, no one ever marketed it. Nobody owns this thing. No one advertises, sells, pushes the idea of using Bitcoin onto you. And it's pretty phenomenal in that way. And that's, very similar to the internet. Whereas, I mean, how many other things are really like that? There's not many. Where technologies come about. Like the first question, I was talking to an older guy about Bitcoin, trying to explain it to him from scratch. And his questions were things, very basic things like, but when you buy a Bitcoin, who are you paying? Like, who is Bitcoin? That sort of thing. And, getting past that bit and realizing that, geez, this has gone all this way with nobody at the helm like that, marketing this thing and telling you why it's good. Only other Bitcoiners are just, it's an organic adoption.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the revelations that I've had as well, like talking to other people who, for better or for worse, are sort of skeptical of some of the certain, I guess, the challenges and the things that are coming up at each stage of hyper Bitcoinization. Those things are sort of what come first in conversations. And so what I mean by that is having a chat with somebody yesterday actually about volatility of Bitcoin and how that's going to be a detriment to being able to price things in Bitcoin. And what I really struggled to convey in a succinct way was that, look, by the time we get to a point where there's no volatility, firstly, you're not going to be measuring it in New Zealand dollars anymore. But secondly, it's already going to be here. Like, when you look at it, I think as a speculative asset, as this thing that sort of sits in your portfolio alongside your KiwiSaver and your Sharesies and all of this, I think that mindset says, well, yeah, it's up and down, man. It's dangerous. It's, maybe it goes to zero. There's this lack of understanding, but I think that volatility, the trading range of whatever it is today, what it's been over the last couple of years, is really insignificant compared to where it's going to be.
Completely. And that's something I've been thinking about and talking about a bit lately, because the investment case or the investment use case for Bitcoin is a temporary thing. Like, when Bitcoin adoption comes on properly, that use case is gone. Like, once we have a Bitcoin standard.
Well, you've got to create value in the real world. You can't just sit on the rent-seeking, behavior. And that's where, like, some of my preconceptions have also been challenged over the last few weeks, because I've been talking to various people. I'm really chomping at the bit to build Bitcoin businesses and kind of get involved with people who are building businesses in the Bitcoin world. And I think we always come to these kinds of ideas with this kind of Silicon Valley mental model of what a business is, which is basically a computer in a room that makes a percentage on every transaction or interaction that a user has. And that's, say, your Google or your Facebooks or whatever. They, in a roundabout way, they've got way too many staff, but the whole thing could run as just a service, right? And it just runs and it clips the ticket. And that, I think that concept of that kind of monopoly over the data, over the user experience, over all of that stuff is an antithesis to Bitcoin, which is that you need to deliver value, and it creates, I think, a more holistic world. And so, I mean, even with Nostr, right, because the data layer underneath, and it's not built on Bitcoin, but it's got built on Bitcoin principles, the data layer underneath isn't owned by the companies who are building apps on top of it. Fundamentally, you have to continue to innovate and build new stuff and keep relevant. Otherwise, you lose your user base. And we've just been in this funny world for like the last couple of decades where you could just kind of sit on things and just, milk it. And that led to a certain attitude, which was like, well, that's the only way to make money. That's the only way to build a business, is to be the milkman, But actually, like, true value and true innovation, it's like, well, that comes from, I think, a different place. And there's a classic thing that these big companies cannot innovate. All innovation happens with small startups, a dedicated team of people who are focused, a few, like literally like maybe 4 or 5 people, sort of squad size. That's where innovation comes from. And then big companies have to buy those small companies to stay relevant. And so, people think, I can never compete with Facebook. Well, it's like, yeah, you can, but it's all stacked. The odds are stacked against you because the Facebook has unlimited capital. So I can just buy, they can buy anything it wants. And that's all fiat thinking. And so building a business on Bitcoin is like coming back to basics, like a small team of people focused on a goal, running it in a sustainable way, and putting all of their energy into building and innovating and being creative. That's where it's at,
It's interesting. I would posit to that, like those companies you mentioned started like that.
Then they lost it.
Yeah, and then half those people involved aren't involved in these companies anymore. They got their big money and off they ran. The other extra element to add to that is I don't know the exact stats, but you often see those little bits about this is the 10 biggest organizations in the world, and none of them existed over X amount of years ago. And they always surprise me because I have the same feeling as you about Facebook and whatnot. They've got unlimited capital and they're just these behemoths, and anything we make they'll buy and becomes part of that that behemoth. But it will be interesting because this history suggests that they don't tend to survive forever. Maybe they can now. But, I mean, having said all of that, it's much of a muchness because my personal belief is that Bitcoin is unstoppable, and that kind of does end that fiat thinking. We'll still get large organizations, but they will grow just like those ones from that small base, and then once they get big, things might be different. Or they,
yeah. I think we're gonna, and this is the bigger kind of meta conceptual piece of what does long-term thinking look like. And if you look at some of the companies in the world that have been around the longest, I think there's a few companies out of Japan, for example, that have done like soy sauce for like a couple of 100 years or something.
Oh yeah.
And these kinds of businesses, they do one thing. They're onto it. They're masterful. They're long-term thinking. They're visionary. They're leaders often in that sort of mindset of stability and kind of these Bitcoin kind of gold standard values, which seem almost quaint, because we've grown up in the world of the Silicon Valley and the unicorn and the 25-year-old hotshot CEO, T-shirt and everything, and that's become normalized as what stability and good business looks like. But the bread and butter of a 300-year-old soy sauce company out of Nagoya in Japan, like that, or some, it's a German steel company or something that's been around since the olden days. Like that's what they do, and they've been able to build the scales of economy, and I mean it's a real output as well. And I mean these are all generally manufacturing companies. They're not just IP or intangibles, and so that's kind of Bitcoin thinking. It's like got me thinking, I guess, as well. Like what does a Bitcoin business look like if you take the middleman and the rent-seeking stuff out? And it's made me realize, like, you kind of approaching building in a Bitcoin standard, you have to be you got to approach it a bit differently, I think. And I still haven't quite worked out how to do that fully, but I believe it's a focus on that continual value add, innovation, stability, long-term thinking, all of these kind of Bitcoin values.
Yeah, there's so much to actually think about how things will happen in a Bitcoin world. Like the more you sit there and think about it, the more you realize there is. Like, it's really fun to try and explore the possibilities of how is this going to work in a Bitcoin world? How is that going to work?
Even, like, for example, looking at, say, Bitcoin businesses, and so there's the classic, BTC maps, we can find a business that accepts Bitcoin, but I think the paradigm for that, we've kind of moved on from, which is that, there's these 3 businesses that I can go to and spend Bitcoin. Like, I think it's deeper than that, where it's like I'm not going to go to the service to look for where I can spend my Bitcoin. I'm waiting to find a recommendation, and I'm waiting for that hyper-local thing where somebody that I engage with locally, or some service that I need in real life, is able to be done by someone locally who accepts Bitcoin. Like, then at that moment, I'm ready to engage with that person, and that might be the type of business that just doesn't even need advertising. It's just word of mouth. And that could be a tradesperson. It could be, it doesn't have to be necessarily a consumer-facing service like a retail operation. It could be anything that we do in our daily life. Firewood, the plumber, electrician, things like that, where it's like, yeah, sure, like, let's create this kind of micro community. And it almost goes back to the basics of, like, an economy. If you've got these different people providing goods and services to each other, and then they also have this better way of paying each other, it's like you're almost going back to the basics of an economy and then building up from there, as opposed to trying to, like, put a veneer on this existing system, which is centralized.
Actually, it's not funny you use the word centralized. That's exactly what I was thinking when you were describing that. We've transformed and advanced by centralizing a lot of things which were maybe unfeasible to do at a decentralized level in the past. But the technologies we're now gaining, internet and now Bitcoin being 2 major ones, means we can start to decentralize again and go back to that and operate in the way that would have been ideal if we had the technology to do it. Well,
that's the thing as well. Like, coming back, one of these concepts. So as we talked about last time, I'm using a lot more cash this year, and I really love cash as a bearer instrument. Once you give someone the cash, they've got the money. There's no verification needed. You either have it or you don't. And it's kind of the little voice at the back of my head when I'm playing around with a Bitcoin idea or something. It's like, well, is this even needed? Because if I just give if the other person has wallet of Satoshi or something, like, do I need to build anything in between them and their customers? Like, some point of sale, some marketplace or whatever. It's like it's still like you're applying like a fiat thinking. It's like, they must need to have a middleman somewhere. But it's like, no, over time, there's just going to be so many incredibly well-designed and well-built wallet tools and open source payment systems and all of that stuff. It's all just going to be there, and it's going to be free. These are going to be all open source, easy to use.
A great example of that is Rob and what he's working on.
Yeah,
Accept Bitcoin, and how complex and difficult it is what he's going through to try and figure out. And he's got to do all of that to meet fiat system requirements. But just like you point out, if he was allowed to, if we legally could do it, he wouldn't need to build anything. They could just have wallet of Satoshi.
Well, that said, it is fully legal to do, Bitcoin to Bitcoin, but it's just the bridging to the fiat world is the bit that introduces complexity. So
it is, yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is, like, my revelation has been that with wallet of Satoshi and Blue Wallet and these really easy, beautiful apps that just work, and they're not even in their final form yet, but once they are, and there's just all of these options out there. You don't need to really build anything in between. It's like cash. You don't need to you don't need to build a new wallet, like a physical wallet or a new coin purse or something. Like, money's money. You put it in your pocket, you give it to someone. Like, there's no innovation required at that level. And Bitcoin and Lightning, it is a little bit more technical, but once that's built, which it pretty much is already, then you actually need to focus on the real world, which is, I need coffee, I need firewood, I need meat, I need vegetables, I need to pay my rent. I've got all of these physical, actual things that need to be paid for, and I just pay them. That we don't need to intermediate, and I think that's kind of like the thing that I've really been thinking about. It's like, don't try and make it complex. It's just, Yeah, there's going to be free plugins for your point of sale software. There's going to be things for Xero. There's going to be all of that stuff. Someone's going to do it, and like some of it we have to do ourselves. Maybe we're going to be the developers and designers on these things, but for the most part, it's just going to be there in the world. It's going to be easy to use, and then you can get out of the way, and the Bitcoin economy will just work. Yes. And I pay the guy to mow my lawns, or I pay my rent, or I pay whatever, and it's all just Bitcoin. We don't need fancy tools, man.
It sounds wonderful. Can't wait.
Yeah, and I mean, but I feel like it is a mindset. It's like trying to convince someone of that when they're not on the boat. It's like they're going to resist it. But when you've got just a small number in it, and I think that's like only a couple of percent required to really shift perceptions. And you see this. Someone wrote about this, like, in the United States, the amount of food that is like kosher for Jewish people is, pretty much all food, right? Because there's this small minority of people who will not, they will only consume that particular thing, right? And so they need everything to be kosher. And that impacts the larger population who don't really care either way. And so when you've got this small population, I think it's an intransient minority or something. I'm just trying to remember the word for it, but basically, a very small minority of people can kind of flip the requirements of the large majority who are not, they don't have a preference. So normal people are like, whatever, I just want to pay. And then you've got a small percentage of Bitcoiners who will only use Bitcoin. That will impact the majority to force their hand effectively.
And especially if it's really cheap and easy for them to accept for that small minority.
Well, it's like, I don't mind, kosher juice, apple juice or whatever, like that's the classic example. It has nothing to do with whether it's kosher or not. It's just got the label on it, but it just works, and it doesn't require any additional thought. And I think that's where you get this number of like 150,000 Bitcoiners is all that's required, say in the US to force that.
Really? Where did they get that number?
It's like maybe 0.5% or something, because what are that, 300 million people? I don't know.
I think so.
I'll see if I can fish it up, but in New Zealand, that number's way smaller. So it's like we only need a couple of thousands of people who will who basically dead set on the idea, for it to kind of force the hand of people who don't have any any preference.
And if you get that small amount of people using it all the time, then you start to see how easy it is, that system. And I think people are underestimating the advantage of instant settlement. Like if you're selling something and you don't want to go through the expense of being able to set up to receive on the FPOS network or Visa, so you can only offer a bank deposit number.
Yeah, so I got here, it's actually, intransigent minority. So the dictatorship of the small minority. And this is Nassim Taleb, Skin in the Game, he writes about this. But yeah, like halal, kosher, all of these things which for certain religions or certain people, that it's like that's a yes or no. It either is or it isn't, and if it isn't, I can't touch it. But the same thing applied to economics and Bitcoin. It's like, well, yeah, I only want Bitcoin. My vendors like, well, or my suppliers are like, yeah, maybe we don't care, but if it's people that are, I guess, people that I'm invoicing and they want my services, it's like, yeah, you have to pay me in Bitcoin, then they have to pay me in Bitcoin if there's no alternative, right? And if it's not a major issue for them, technically, to do that, it's like, yeah, sure. It's like, do you want a bank transfer or do you want PayPal? So no, I want Bitcoin.
The thing I can't wait to see, which you haven't seen in New Zealand particularly, but I haven't even seen it much overseas, is a retailer or a merchant not just accepting Bitcoin, but encouraging you to use Bitcoin over fiat, like offering an incentive, because there's clear incentives there. And so I can't wait to start to see that happen, because I think then we'll see, like somebody like, hang on, I get 2% off if I pay in Bitcoin. I don't know anything about Bitcoin. How do I get Bitcoin? I want that 2% off.
I reckon because it's an emergent system and there's a lot of complexity, I have a feeling there's going to be a little bit more to it, and it will be there'll be a situation where fiat currency is actually being used at a faster rate because people are trying to get rid of it. And you see this in the US with the old silver dimes, I think it was, that they had, the silver coins. And it's like those people would collect those, and so they'd come through the till and they'd put them aside. And then the alloy coins would be the ones that are in the till. And that's kind of the classic, hard money. And I think you'll see the situation where people will want the Bitcoin, but there'll be more and more people who are trying to get rid of the fiat, and they're trying to just burn it off, which will lead to the devaluation of the fiat quicker and quicker. So is it that you get a discount, or you get a discount if you pay with Bitcoin, or is it that burn off of fiat actually leads to an increase in the value of Bitcoin, and there's this kind of grey zone?
I think both those scenarios can exist. I
Maybe
think
at
the
the
one
same time.
you described might come after, because you might get a merchant who starts to accept Bitcoin, then gets curious and understands Bitcoin, then decides, what, I really want Bitcoin. I want my customers to pay me in Bitcoin so I can hodl it. So I think you might get that first, and then at first people might be like, well, I need to get some Bitcoin because I'm going to get a discount if I use it. And then that behavior will slowly morph into, oh, he's offering me a discount of Bitcoin, but I don't want to give up my Bitcoin. I'd rather burn my fee.
Actually, I think you're right. Now that I look at it, because I was chatting to someone about this, I would take a discount in NZ dollar terms to get the Bitcoin, and I would like quite a.
I would.
You would too.
If I ran a shop, I'll be all over it. Yeah.
Or even a service, and I would take a pretty decent discount, to be honest.
I would too.
Yeah, like double digits easily, just to get the Bitcoin. But and that's because from a personal perspective, I'm on a Bitcoin standard, myself. I'm thinking about things in sats, and I still have to pay a lot of fiat, bills. But I'm like, those are the sats that I want, and there's a certain intangible quality to it, which is kind of, I guess, what you're pricing into the discount. That because the normal people would say, well, just get the fiat and then buy the Bitcoin, but having to not do that step is worth the discount.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just love the idea. Almost wish I ran a shop now, because I'd definitely be all over it. I'll be creating all sorts. If I had a friend who ran a shop, I'd be getting right into it, because I'd be wanting to just hoover up that Bitcoin. And
it's non KYC as well.
Yeah.
You're just getting it come off the street, basically.
And then, the obvious percent you discount straight away is the transaction fees involved in the fiat network, that clearance time. There's, straight away, I guess you could take, I don't know much about merchant fees with Visa network and all that, but I'm assuming you could take 2% right off the bat, because I think they charge around that, don't they? Most of them are putting it onto the customer now, but that'll be the easy starting point.
Yeah.
But I'd like yourself, I'd encourage it way more. If I was a merchant, that'd be my capital.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know, it's coming back to the quality of it. I think it's almost like a childlike sense of sort of value. Like the analogy that I give is like, okay, if I'm going to mow your lawns or do something, kind of, you're going to pay me this money, and then there's like different qualities of money, right? So there's you can put the money in my bank account, but then, or you could give me the cash, or you could give me this tiny little fleck of gold. And it sounds silly, but in a way, I'm like, if I was able to collect little flecks of gold, just little shavings, and it's all worth the same amount technically, but there's something more real about that, and I think that's like not priced into it in a way. I don't know how to, I don't really have the language to describe it, but and as we talked about with cash, it's like it's a different sense of value beyond the face value of it, that you can use it even if the lights go out.
Well, it's just that obvious thing, whereas transacting money is just it's an IOU, and you get the cash in your hand, and that's not an IOU. That's actual
final
money.
settlement. Yeah.
And I like how you use childlike, because it's so,
you get the money right.
It is childlike, but then, like so many other things, the child has the best sense because it's obvious. And then it's only as you get older and you start to realise you don't really understand these things, children. There's more complexity, but actually it all is very simple.
Actually, you know what? That would be an interesting psychology experiment, maybe like for a university student to undertake. Is at what age do children recognise the difference in the abstraction between money as a piggy bank, physical money, and digital money? Because I reckon that probably comes quite late in development.
I think you're right, and I think I've had a real case of that recently. So I've got a pocket money system with my kids, and I've set up bank accounts for them and putting it in there, but they don't take any notice. Like, they don't really. I tell them they've got so much money in their bank accounts. They're like, "Oh, do I?" And then they get $20 from grandma for Christmas, and it's less than what they got in their bank account, but you wouldn't know it. They've just won the lottery. Like, this physical $20 note is insanely amazing to them. And then they got a few presents like their Christmas and birthdays, and they had a little pile of cash each. And it was getting hard to kind of manage between myself and their mum around, if they're out with you, I've got the cash or what, And so we said, I'll just have the cash and I'll deposit money into their bank accounts. So they've got an electronic record. Well, they're very disappointed with this, They wanted the cash. They don't want to know that there's something on a screen. They liked the physical money in their hand, and that's what they want.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think with that kind of running that notion as well, like Bitcoin, in a way, it requires a certain amount of abstraction because it isn't physical in the sense that you can touch it. But I think as you become an adult, you're able to appreciate that it's like physical / digital. It's not purely abstract and untouchable. Like, it does have a certain physicality to it, but it's just you can't touch it. I mean, I can't even describe this. Like, that it's got something to it. Even the white paper he described it as digital cash, and I must admit I didn't really properly get that. I just read it and carry on. Is that what he says? Is that what he says in the white paper?
I think it is.
Okay, I'm going to have a look.
Ourselves up here.
No, it's all good. I should have it framed on the wall.
It took me actually an embarrassingly long time to really understand what he meant, what he, she, or they meant.
Yeah.
And the penny dropped, and I was like, yeah, it's like digital cash.
And no, you are right. Electronic cash.
Yeah, sorry.
Because he doesn't. I don't think he says gold anywhere, does he?
No, because early on when I was getting to Bitcoin, that's what I would say. It's like digital gold, but no, it is digital cash or electronic cash.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of making discoveries here, like long belated discovery, 14 years later, but that physicality of it, and I think that duality, which others have spoken about, because it is pegged into the real world. There's obviously the energy inputs and all of these real world things that kind of anchor it. And I think maybe a child would struggle to understand it, but maybe not. This would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, and we're talking about children with cash. To teach them about electronic money, whether it's cash or fiat, would be far easier if, like, my children aren't old enough. We haven't let them have their own phones or devices yet, but it'll be far easier to say, here, download a wallet. Now you can just go, I'm going to send your pocket money to this wallet. To do that in the fiat system, I'm going to have to take them into a bank. I'm not even sure what the steps are.
Yeah, your kids are going to be Bitcoin natives, man.
That's what I'm trying to do.
And you get them, because you get them on the blockchain, in the sense, like, get them on the mempool, and it's like, here's my transaction.
Yeah.
Grandma sent me, 50,000 sats or whatever, for my birthday. Here it is. Here's the transaction. And it's kind of like internet natives, like that. For them, that will be real.
That's what I've been saying to them as well. I've said to the oldest one a couple of times recently, been telling you, like, you can have an advantage over the other kids, because when you grow up, you're going to understand all of this. You're going to know what Bitcoin is and how it works, and everybody else, all your friends, are going to be coming a little bit late to the party.
So how old is your oldest?
She turned 11 today.
Okay, so she's so by the time she becomes an adult, she'll have a couple of epochs
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at least two or three epochs.
I think she got 2 halvings to
Yeah.
adulthood.
Yeah.
Never thought of it that
two
way.
or three
yeah.
halvings. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
by the time, I mean, she's starting university or whatever, she'll be in a much different position.
And she does. She's picked up a lot of the principles quite well. Like she was when I first started getting a Bitcoin, she had a habit of asking me, how much is my Bitcoin worth today? And I'd tell her. And after she first started buying it, it was during a nice bull run, and she was all excited. And then I didn't get the question for a while. And then it was ages, and she said, how much is my Bitcoin worth now? And I was like, wow. Things have been kind of going down, a little bit, blah, blah, blah. And then she just shocked me straight off the bat and said, oh, well, does it mean it's a good time to buy it because I'll get more Bitcoin for my money? I was like, oh, my God. Proudest parenting moment.
Yeah, I got some ideas here. So I wonder if there's a way to almost gamify this. Like this could be an idea like, for example, kids get, they do some chores or every parent, I guess, does things differently, but sometimes you might give pocket money, but being able, especially when they're younger, being able to put some ring fencing on there so that they may be getting pocket money and sats, but somehow doing it, maybe, I don't know, some sort of bolt card or something where it ends up, they can kind of pay for stuff, but they're paying for it with sats, even if they're paying it out in fiat. I don't quite know how that could work, but just so that their thinking and their kind of value, the piggy bank and mindset, which a child develops, is able to be fostered with a Bitcoin standard in mind. And so they think, well, actually, Dad, I don't want to buy the lollies today because the New Zealand dollar and the Bitcoin price is low. I'd rather actually just sit on the sats. And they can start, and then they're basically on the Bitcoin standard. Whereas if you say, well, if you wait, you're going to get twice as much lollies if you just wait. And then they wait, and then, they...
A really good angle I've taken with the kids, and I've stolen this off... so there's a guy on Twitter, Bitcoin Say, and he wrote a book called... I think the name is Bitcoin in Black America.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but he's known as Bitcoin Zay on Twitter. And he runs some education classes and school holidays and things for kids and teenagers. And his big thing is... Your goal is become a Satoshi millionaire, because that's an amount of Bitcoin that's within reach with dedicated effort from a younger person, and it sounds nice because it's got millionaire in it, and that just gets a kid's interest, So I've started busting that out of my kids. Your target should be to become a Satoshi millionaire, and they pick up and run with that. They like that. It's got a ring to it. It's something that's a target that's not too infeasible that they can work towards. I think it's roughly about $300 or $400 New Zealand at the moment, maybe. I can't quite remember.
$230.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely achievable, saving money, saving birthday money. And then what I really like about that as well is, this might be, I don't know, this is a bit more of an advanced idea, but even the evolution of, say, your children's use of Bitcoin almost reflects the value of Bitcoin and the stages of Bitcoin adoption. And so the first stage is store of value, right? Second stage is medium of exchange, getting them exposed to Lightning as they're a young adult. And then finally it's a unit of account as they become in the workforce. And they start, thinking in Satoshis. So maybe, look, a kid, whether they're 5 or 11 or whatever, for them, really, parents are going to be looking after most of it. It's a store of value. You're just a hodler. Maybe you get your first job in high school or whatever. You start using it as a medium of exchange. You want to buy something with your friends, go to the movies. By then, we're going to be in a Bitcoin world where you can spend Bitcoin. And then once you really start work in the workforce and that, you can start actually pricing everything in Bitcoin that you earn.
Your salary in Bitcoin.
Yeah, maybe maybe that's what it means to be a Bitcoin native, is to can't come up through that.
Oh, that sounds nice, and it fits with what I'm doing at the moment, because basically I've got them on the store of value idea.
And you're going to have all these old people who are like, oh, my day we had fiat, and it's going to be like, what are you on, old man? Like, just give me the sats.
Yeah. We used to sit on the train reading our newspapers, not looking at our phones.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of... Yeah.
I can see that playing out, and it's interesting because we have a very conservative young generation at the moment, as in people sort of my age and younger, who I think just for various reasons, because we're at the end of the fiat cycle, we're very locked in. It's kind of petrified, and so I think that my generation will probably be the last one to really hold on in a way with resisting it, I reckon, because they've worked so hard for nothing. You know, can't buy a home, can't buy anything because of this fiat monster machine.
Yeah, the more I think about that, the sadder it makes me. But also I think there's some hope there, because I feel like there's a generation sitting there that is like a coiled spring. Like they just need a chance a little bit. Things have been made tougher for them to own homes and aspire to things. And now they've got this vision of this world where everything's a service, and you pay your tax and you get the service, and now go figure out how to be happy in day-to-day life with that system, you know? When everyone's got some drive and some passion and some aspiration of something, they need something to point it at. So I'm hoping, you know, as Bitcoin starts to get adopted, we could see that generation just completely come out of their shell and explode.
Yeah, in a good way. It's just really built in.
And I hope it happens fast so it can happen for them. They don't have to live out their lives never having had a chance at something like that.
Well, I think it's almost a language as well. Like if you look at bilingual children or people in sort of families with different, cultural backgrounds, there's this ability for children to sort of connect between both worlds. And what we're seeing now is the language of value is changing. And I've been able to learn that language. And in a way, I mean, this would be another interesting psychology experiment, but is there a correlation between people who speak a second language and people's ability to grok Bitcoin? And it sounds a bit strange, but I mean, Andreas comes to mind straight away. He speaks like Greek, English, all these Andreas Antonopoulos, like all these different languages. Yeah, just as an idea, like, does it open up something in your mind where you're able to sort of entertain different ideas simultaneously? And so maybe you have these young kids who are like, yeah, I used to see my parents, you know, they had the bank account and this whole system. No, because it's not just one thing. It's not like just one word. It's an entire language of value that is the fiat system. And then there's also the language of Bitcoin. And being able to be fluent in both of those is kind of the transition at the moment. So you and I are sort of sitting there studying it. You know, we're reading the books and doing the hard work, you know, just like when I was learning Japanese and when I was learning Chinese, you know, I was like studying both of these quite hard. But for the children, that just naturally happens.
Yes.
And they're not going to need any of these books, you know. The Bitcoin Standard, like, what's that? It's like a Japanese textbook. I already speak Japanese, Mum. Like, I don't need it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's true, because it is. I think I've read before about how it's well documented that kids can pick up languages incredibly fast. Like, and anything really. I mean, I see it in my kids all the time with technology.
Oh man,
they'll show me something on a computer, and then they'll do something. Oh, and then look at this. I'm like, wait, how did you change between those screens? Like, I've never done that before. And they'll teach me things because they get the design these days. It's intuitive, and they figure out, oh well, if I want to do that, the natural thing would be if they created it like this. And what do you know, they did. Whereas we're used to being brought up with manuals and learning. I am anyway. Sorry. Yeah. No. But I think we're onto something here. I'd love to explore this a bit more. Like, so taking that kind of childlike approach to learning and to engaging with a new system, like, what is, you know, and with your kids as an example here, like, you know, they are basically bilingual in the language of value, and being able to flip between those seamlessly, which takes quite a considered effort to learn that as an adult and come into it and to go down the rabbit hole. It's like, yeah, the kids are just going to do it normally. They're just going to pick it up. And almost all of our current preconceptions around, you know, reluctance to accept it and, you know, kind of adoption and stuff like that, is that just going to melt away? Actually, that's really interesting. And seems like the answer should be yes, because we've got that, you know, we've been normalized to this system. And so it's very hard to think of something that could be this radically different. Whereas, the kids do pick it up immediately. I think I may have mentioned the story before, but with the kids watching a film that was set about, 150 years ago or something, and there was a reward poster up in the street, reward to catch a criminal, and it had on like £1, and because it's set in England, and the kids are just like, why is it so low? Like they didn't know pounds are like $1. Like, that's nothing. And so then that was my in to talk to them about Bitcoin, obviously. But, with their brains not having grown up and understood what inflation is, etc., they were just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why is money worth less now than it was back then? And then I explained it to the eldest, and she immediately got it and just moved on. Next question.
Well, they don't come into it with preconceptions, and I think that's the frustration when you're talking with adults who you're trying to talk to them about Bitcoin, and they're like, oh, well, but what about the volatility? What about the government's going to ban it? Like all of these just classic FUD arguments, and it's like, well, with the kid, they're like, oh, okay, cool, sweet.
Yeah.
Can I? Is that how it works? Oh, sweet, I can use it on my iPad. Oh, easy. Oh, I don't want to.
And the fact that it's simpler means they'll just do it.
Yeah,
right? And they won't be.
I'll just send you the stats
by these. Yeah. It's history.
And because there's this technical aspect to it, it's like, oh yeah, sweet. Oh, it's on the block. It's in the mempool here. Oh look. Oh, sitting around. Oh sweet, we just got a confirmation. Sweet, cool. Like I could see that being quite formative, in the sense of like the first time, as when I was a kid, playing, first computer, and these kind of moments where you're like, yeah, this is naturalized. And so maybe a lot of our models are sort of mental models are based on this idea that everyone's going to be reluctant forever, and it's going to be this hard slog to orange pill the world. But it's like, 10, 15 years from now. Well, in fact, the first real generation will be 6 years from now, because a 20-year generation, Bitcoin's 14 years old. But there's not that many people who are involved in the early days. But there could be kids who are born, within the Bitcoin standard, who will be coming of age shortly, within the Bitcoin epoch, since 2009. So for them, it's like, I don't know anything else.
And it's far simpler. Like, it's really common. Children work out money by themselves. They play games where they create their own currency. And when you look at the games that they make up on the spot, you're like, well, we use those stones as money, etc., like things like that. They invent an accurate monetary system. Like,
they're doing better than the central banks.
Yeah, they are. And it's much more aligned with how Bitcoin actually works. So it translates beautifully.
I wonder, it'd be interesting to see like what a child's reaction would be to an IOU. If you say, all right, here's the marshmallow, here's an IOU for the marshmallow, which one do you want? These types of questions. And just the look of just disgust on their face. It's like, no, I want the marshmallow. Give me the money. Give me the hard money. But as an adult, we sort of do the mental gymnastics to be like, well, I've got 10 marshmallows, but I don't actually have custody of them. So, but I still got them. You know what I mean? But
you can trust me.
You can trust me. I've got them. I reckon that could be a real interesting experiment, and also because it's still quite early days in a sense. Like, we don't really have. I think there's a bit of a movement. There's some people who've done some like picture books and things, like kind of Bitcoin themed stuff for kids, but it's still like, I don't know, we don't quite have. We're not quite there yet, I think, communicating it.
I've got one book that's written in a child's picture book style, and I got it. I thought this would be great. I'll get my kids to read it. But once I got it, I realised actually it's written and looks like a children's book, but it's really for adults.
Yeah.
Like, it's children's explaining in child language about Bitcoin. So my eldest read it. She said she got it. I'm not sure. She didn't talk a lot about it. But it's actually more useful for no coin. It's like brand new people.
Yeah.
So my mum read it and was like, that's really interesting.
I wonder if this is even worth, like, is this still fair thinking though? Because it's like, you don't give a kid like a language textbook. They just learn, and I wonder if this is the meta kind of idea here, that by just having a Bitcoin standard within your family and your community and stuff, that kids are just going to naturally kind of pick it up and you don't have to even explicitly sort of be like, well, 1 Satoshi, this is the blockchain. Like, they're just kind of going to work it out and kind of trust in the process that they're going to be curious and kind of, because you certainly don't learn about money as a kid, really. Like, you got the piggy bank.
Not really, although Monopoly is pretty good. Like, it's a really good portrayal of the fiat system somewhat. Like, if you say to the kids, okay, because everyone invents their own rules in Monopoly as well, and you say, okay, we'll make loans. You can loan to each other, and you can get loans from the bank. If you roll that out, then it is the fiat system. Yeah. And there's that classic bit out of the Monopoly manual or instructions that goes around, I've seen on Twitter, where there's some wording in the instructions of the game. What do you do if the bank runs out of money? And the bank never runs out of money. It says it. And it says you can get a piece of paper and write down if there's not enough $100 notes or whatever. I was like, you're kidding me. This is ridiculous.
I always hated Monopoly. I found it really frustrating.
Oh, it's
on purpose. Like, it felt like it was getting my heart rate up. And
if you don't win, it's a pretty awful game.
Yeah,
especially for kids.
Fight with my brother.
My brother was well known for flipping the board.
Yeah, that's like a meme at this point, right? Like flipping the board. Okay, interesting. Well, I think there's some ideas there, man. Like, not necessarily even prescribing it, like having to build, make picture books and stuff. I have a feeling just like what you're doing with your family, and I think maybe what a lot of people are doing, it's just like having kind of a Bitcoin standard that's just being used is just like speaking your native language at home, right? It's just going to sort of, by osmosis, the kids are going to pick it up. They're going to pick up those values as well. And so they're going to be thinking in sats. They're going to be, thinking, well, actually, I don't need this now. I can wait. And they're going to see it. And as they get older, because you're starting them at quite a young age, but as they get through the halvening, and they'll be like, oh, this is going up and up and up. And that's probably going to give them a real insight as, you go through the halvenings. And they're like, by the time they enter university, it's like, okay, they're going to be more orange pilled. In fact, it's like an orange pill isn't even required at that point. It's like, I don't know what the internet equivalent of it would be, but it's like, it just is. There is no orange pill.
Yeah, well, I know that must be. I wonder what my kids say at school, because that must, to them, Bitcoin's just this normal thing. Dad talks about Bitcoin all the time. We've got Bitcoin.
We're hodlers.
Yeah, that's just a normal thing. And I think I told you the story already of, I give it to them as a reward. It's like, challenge them to climb the fireman's pole at the playground, 50,000 Satoshis each. And then all of a sudden, the next time they came around, they're like, hey, Dad, when you gave me those 50,000 Satoshis? And I just loved it. I was just like, oh my gosh, you said Satoshis. Like, this is fantastic.
Yeah, I love it.
Just get it in the lexicon. To them, it must be normal. Like I talk to adults about Bitcoin, like, oh, okay. Oh, I don't have any. I like stocks. Whereas kids, they're just like, yeah, Bitcoin. Well, there's Bitcoin and there's dollars, and this is just normal.
Yeah, man. I like it. I think there's some ideas to explore here in the future. I think bilingual systems, a complete language, not just a spoken language, but a value language is being taught to your kids, and many people have got young kids, and it's going to be revolutionary as those people come in, and it just is, and it's not even like, oh, well, I don't know, that reluctance, which to be honest, it feels quite similar to the reluctance a lot of people had with computers and the internet, because I grew up and I was like, man, just what are you doing? Just use a computer, like. And my parents were like, I got to double click. Oh, okay. Click it twice. Yeah, that's it. Because I was lucky. I kind of grew up just with it, with me and my brother, we had a computer when we were little, and it was naturalized.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet straight away, but we had computers. And so, and what was good at that time as well is because it was the early days of computers, I was playing around with like BASIC and MS-DOS, and I got to know it before it became kind of the Fisher-Paykel, push button thing, where it's just the iPhone, which is kind of intuitive, but it's also like this, it's abstracted away. But if you've got kids and you're teaching them like, here's the mempool, here's the confirmations, here are the sats, and here's and you've got them understanding the fundamental building blocks. I mean, that's just such a valuable skill. by the time we're in the future, when this is all, a lot of this is abstracted away, and there's these huge enterprises built upon this, having someone who's like fundamentally understands the building blocks of it is going to be very valuable.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, we might wrap it there. This is an interesting topic. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on.
No problem. Cheers for having me on.
Bilingual Bitcoiners. All right, man. Thank you very much.
Cheers.